Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
Long time no dialogue.
Yeah, no, I missed you.
Yeah, it's been hard. I mean, when we first agreed to dialogue other people, you know, I knew it'd be hard on both of us, but I figured it would only deepen our appreciation for one another.
Yeah, it usually has that effect. I think when you start seeing other people, yeah, it strengthens your relationship.
Yeah, always. So Iraq.
The Pinkerton was pretty good. Go ahead.
That hurts, man. That hurts. Let's keep those things to ourselves, okay?
Okay.
Iraq.
Yes.
Just read that word has been relayed to Jafari that George Bush does not want him to be Prime Minister of Iraq. And presumably he's supposed to respond to that by agreeing not to be, even though so far the democratic process has him being the Prime Minister of Iraq. I don't know. It seems to me America may be overestimating how much clout it has at this point. I mean, I'm sure it has a lot. You know, I'm sure in the short term there are material ways that the Iraqi government, including Jafari, is dependent on American assistance. But in the long run, I'm not so sure that Shiites would be especially sorry to see us leave. I think the Sunnis would be sorrier.
No, that's right. But first, it's been clear for a while that we didn't want Jafari to be Prime Minister.
Well, right.
So
but I mean, that's one thing. But we relayed the order to him, basically.
Well, we tried everything else, and now we've told them we want him to go. Look, yeah, but we're allowed to say what we want. We have a big investment in the country. They can defy us.
But we can express an opinion.
Then we react to what they say. That's fine.
But we can express an opinion. But when we have an emissary relay the word to him, the implication is he's supposed to take it as a command. I mean.
No, he said George Bush wants him to go, and George Bush wants him to go. If he wants to stay on and defy George Bush, that's fine. He hasn't been picked the head of the government by the democratic process. The democratic process hasn't worked itself out yet. You need 2/3 of the votes in Parliament. He doesn't have 2/3 of the votes in Parliament.
Right, but
he doesn't even have a majority of the votes in Parliament, as far as I know. He is very close to a majority.
Well, the informal canvassing indicated weeks ago that he had the vote. He's certainly poised in a way nobody else is poised.
He has the vote of the Shiites.
What?
He has the vote of the Shiite caucus.
Well,
it's like the Republicans saying, "Well, our caucus has voted for this." Well,
nobody's going to get it without the support of the Shiite caucus.
No, that's true, but there's this other. The guy we're backing is a Shiite.
Well, anyway, do you agree that already this is kind of bad publicity for us? I mean, already. Well, let's review the context. I mean, the tension between the U.S. and the Shiites is growing.
Yes.
Even before this, there was this raid upon al-Sadr's people that is controversial. Was it in a mosque or in a building ancillary to a mosque or whatever?
It's completely inexplicable because we said we were attacking insurgents. Well, Sadr's forces aren't really insurgents. They're part of the ruling coalition at the moment.
Well, right, but this points to the mess we're in at this point. But there was a blog item on Democracy Arsenal by Heather Hurlburt, saying that already, I think even before this, the Shiites were getting they're starting to call this the second betrayal by America. The first one having been taking place during the first Bush administration, famously. So there's already a lot of tension, and this seems to me.
On their part.
What's that?
That is a little excitable on their part.
Well, it's a volatile situation we're in, and the point you made is interesting. I mean, we're raiding Shiites, but they're not insurgents. Well, no, but they're going out and killing a lot of innocent civilians. We haven't labeled them as insurgents yet, but they are killing. They are sponsoring these death squads, and it just raises the question of what do you do when you're in the middle of a civil war?
Right.
I mean, if you imagine this descending into full-scale civil war and us continuing to kind of play it both ways, that just seems to me like not a viable role. I mean, what are we like a kind of very assertive referee where one day we'll say, well, we think these Shiites have overstepped, so we're going to kill some of them, and then the next day it's the Sunnis. I mean,
well, I think our role is that we don't like anybody killing anybody, and if anybody kills anybody, we're going to stop it.
Perfectly defensible moral position, Mickey, but imagine it playing out amid full-scale civil war.
No, I understand, but the idea would be to stop it from becoming a full-scale civil war. What I wonder is, are we getting any points with the Sunnis for this? I mean, you would think that, having the Shiites furious at us, would convince the Sunnis that we are a fairly fair-minded referee.
I think
and
they
I don't
have
think
warmed
that's-
up to us somewhat very recently over things like this. But the problem is you can't have it. You can't have it both ways. And it seems to me ultimately, if things continue to go downhill, and I think lately you'll agree they've been going downhill at some rate. Ultimately, we basically have to either pick a side or get out. That's the argument. That's
No,
what
I'm not saying
suggesting.
things can't go downhill, but and they've clearly gone downhill in a new way. But there's some good aspects to the new way it's gone downhill too. It means the Sunnis are thinking twice. It means the insurgency is sort of eclipsed.
It's sort of what eclipsed?
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about the insurgents taking over Iraq. We're talking about the insurgents preventing the Sunnis from being slaughtered by the Shiites.
Well, no, we're still doing big raids. We did that big, high-profile airborne raid on Sunnis a couple of weeks ago or something. They still are insurgents. They're blowing up mosques.
They're still there, but it's not clear that they are wildly successful. All I'm saying is that, yes, this is a new form of disorder, but let's not get hysterical about it. I mean, yes, it could go all that.
That's been your position all along, and things have continued to get worse and worse and worse, and you've continued to say, no, I think it's still salvageable. So far, it only seems less so every,
if we are going to, we do not want Jafari to be prime minister, so if we don't want Jafari to be prime minister, at some point there's going to be a crunch where we're going to piss off his supporters, and this is that crunch. I mean, of course, and they're going to get angry. I agree that it's...
You make it sound like a small thing, alienating all the Shiites
in Iraq. Well, it's not all the Shiites. We are promoting a rival Shiite group, which is probably just as bad, the one that runs the Badr Brigade. So it's not...
I think when we intervene in such a ham-handed way and say, no, we're going to pick your president after all,
we didn't say we'll pick
after all this democracy talk,
he's not alienates
large
He's
numbers
not
of
intervening in it. I think I've never understood that with Israel. I don't understand it with Iraq. We can say who we want to be president. That's not intervening in another country's foreign affairs. We can say we want Sharon to lose.
Maybe you should
That's
go over
not
to Baghdad
intervening in Israel's affairs.
Maybe you should go over to Baghdad and deliver a lecture in deductive logic or something, and that would straighten things out. But for the time being, I think we're stuck with the way things are actually going to be perceived over there, Mickey.
Well, but we've done it. I mean, they elected this guy. What are we going to do? I'm sure we haven't done it particularly ham-handed, except picking a day when we happen to have killed a bunch of people in his offices. On the other hand, that might reinforce the message. You never know.
Those aren't his offices. I mean, he and Sadr are two separate entities, but because Sadr gave him
Bob,
crucial support.
One of the places we attacked, maybe there are two attacks, but one of them had a Dawa party office in it.
Is that right?
That's his party, yeah.
Well, aren't people saying these are mainly the Mahdi militia people that were in this, whatever it was, the mosque compound?
Yeah, well, they took off a compound that had attached to it an office that was his party's office. I mean, there were several buildings.
Okay.
He had one of them.
Well, in any event, I'm glad you continue to be optimistic or less pessimistic.
I'm just against the drumbeat of hysteria just with every new development. I think Khalilzad's probably about as slick an operator as you can. I don't think he would deliver a ham-handed ultimatum unless that was the only option available to him. And so criticizing his competence seems misplaced. It may be that the situation was untenable from the beginning.
And it may be that this didn't come from him. It came from Bush, and he's reluctantly carrying it out. He's not the one ultimately in charge.
Now, that's possible, too, but I agree. But, I mean, it may be that, as John Burns says, there was no way to take over Iraq without it descending into a civil war. It is hard to believe that if we'd done what all the carping critics have said and, done
that
things...
wouldn't include me, right?
I don't think it includes you. It includes all the people who said, I was for the war, but I am against the way it was carried out. Andrew Sullivan.
It definitely doesn't include me.
If we'd have more troops. Well, if you'd had more troops, I don't think we would have stopped them from blowing up the mosque, and we wouldn't have stopped these reprisal killings. It may be that it was an undoable project from the beginning. That's entirely possible, but it's hard to believe that the botches that occurred, and of course there were botches, if we had done those things right, this wouldn't have happened.
It would not have been friction-free. And you're right that although I don't think I've ever publicly said a word in defense of Don Rumsfeld, the truth is he's getting attacked even more thoroughly than he would on the merits, precisely because, as you suggest, there are supporters of the war, like David Brooks, who don't want to see the fundamental idea behind the war impugned. And so he is becoming the official scapegoat of the neocons.
One more point. Suppose it does descend into civil war. We back off. We start to get out, say it's your business. You really think there's still this disaster scenario where it turns into a huge Shiite Sunni, multi-nation debacle?
Oh, I think there's a real chance of that. I don't know what happens. And I mean, that's what struck me today when I started thinking about the fact that we're fighting the Shiites and the Sunnis at the same time, is that increasingly I'm having trouble conceptualizing how this plays out. Because this very position, being in the middle of a true civil war, is something I can't conceive clearly, how you even play those cards without just either choosing a side or getting out. So no, I don't know, but certainly once it's full-scale civil war, I think most people agree there's an appreciable chance of it going regional.
Well, my question is, wouldn't we see people lining up in Sunni countries now to volunteer to go defend their Sunni brethren who are under attack, if that were the case? Maybe not.
Maybe it's good news we haven't seen more. We've obviously seen some. I don't know how tightly they're controlling borders or what the variables are, but maybe it is good news we have not seen more of that. Of course, the separate question is just whether governments decide to intervene formally.
That's the point I was going to make. Yeah, I guess it depends. If Syria and Egypt all of a sudden decide they want to gin up opposition, they're going to be able to do it. Well, that's all I have to say, I think.
I think we've certainly exhausted our fund of actual knowledge.
Okay, well, let's move on.
Where are we next?
Whoops, that was
Mearsheimer?
Terrible bill. Yes. Now we're on to this long article that appeared in the London Review of Books.
Too long, I would say.
On the influence of the Israel lobby, which I read all the commentary, and then I got the views of the commenters and the views of the original sources, as Whit Stillman said in Metropolitan. But I did not read the whole 12,000-word article, but I'm still ready to pontificate on it.
Well, go ahead. Well, should we provide background, because it hasn't gotten massive mainstream attention. I mean,
go ahead.
John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt from the University of Chicago and the Harvard's Kennedy School, respectively, political scientists, wrote this piece complaining, about America's Middle East policy, arguing that, it revolves around Israel.
Right.
B, to America's detriment, and C, that it does so because of the influence of what they call the Israel lobby, which they say is not monolithic, it's not a conspiracy, it includes evangelical Christians, it doesn't include all Jews, and so on. They do all the to-be-sures, but that has not stopped them from getting pilloried, as they more or less implicitly predicted, in noting that in the piece that people who make the kind of arguments they're making tend to get called anti-Semitic.
Yeah. Well, you and I both worked at the New Republic. We know that there is a powerful Jewish lobby. We know that people do seek to influence the American government on behalf of Israel. They think that the interests of the United States and Israel coincide. And there are cases where they think that they haven't coincided, where they've sided with the United States against Israel, most obviously being the Jonathan Pollard case. This Israeli spy who a lot of the Israeli government would like us to return, and the American government has not returned. But it seems to me, first, that this is really an argument about policy. Has our policy been distorted in ways that depart from the United States' national interest? That's what these people are really pissed off about, and there are a lot of them. I mean, they're all the Scowcroftian realist opponents of the war tend to blame a cabal of Zionists or Likudniks. And as Chris Hitchens notes, there were a lot of high-energy Jews very prominent in Bush policy circles in the run-up to the war. Some of them are gone. Fife, most obviously. But go ahead.
Well, there's also people like Rumsfeld and Cheney and Bolton, who I think they mention here when they list names, and I don't think any of them are Jewish. But
just you don't have to be Jewish, to
be part of the Israel lobby.
Part of the Israel lobby, exactly. So I never understood hey, Rumsfeld's not Jewish. I never understood what argument, what value that argument had. And there's an obvious sort of BS argument, which is made by Chris Hitchens in Slate, which is this idea that, only a fool would think that solving the Israeli-Palestine dispute would, stop Osama bin Laden and the jihadists. Two points. First, sometimes, people say they're not going to be stopped if you do X, but when you do X, it in fact stops them. We on the left in the 60s said the Vietnam War was just part of our larger struggle against capitalism. But hey, when the Vietnam War went down, the largest struggle against capitalism evaporated too. So people aren't always the best. You can't always trust people's statement of their intentions. And second, obviously, if they were somehow peace were to break out between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and there were a Palestinian state, and there was some negotiation, a lot of Osama's recruits would die out. He would keep up his jihad, but he wouldn't attract any followers because the basic animus that prompts people to join up with Osama is in large part seeing pictures of Israelis and Palestinians fighting it out.
Right. That's the big point, is that regardless of what his motivation is, and his motivation is certainly not to bring justice to the Palestinians, I think, the fact is it's a big recruiting issue for him, the plight of the Palestinians.
Yeah. I think the first point is true, too. People, say, I don't care about Israel, but then, hey, if that's settled, all of a sudden your motive evaporates. Even if you're not a recruit, even if you're already part of the job.
But bin Laden himself has larger motivations. I mean, he envisions the restoration of the caliphate.
No, I understand. But I thought Hitchens' piece in Slate was pretty much a positioning piece. Of his usually low quality, I thought. It was high quality. It was very erudite and introduced a lot of evidence from all sorts of parts of world history. But it basically said, I think Hitchens thinks there is a Zionist lobby, and so he's posing as the opponent of these people who say there is, which gets him, points for being somewhere in the middle.
Well, no, but then he wanted to close with this by attaching this whiff of anti-Semitism to this, and so the argument he mounted at the end was, it's interesting that these so-called realists don't make nearly as big a deal about, say, our relationship to Pakistan, and Pakistan does blah, 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 blah. Well, it's not hard to distinguish between Pakistan and Israel in pragmatic, realist terms. Certainly, our relationship with Pakistan is much less of a public relations problem in the Muslim world than the relationship with Israel. Secondly, it does not impede access to oil, so far as I know, and these realists are very big on access to oil. And in fact, one example they cite is that and I didn't know this, but that I guess some position we took on Israel encouraged the oil boycott of '73 or something. But I thought that closing note, he was kind of straining to turn around.
I don't think it wasn't a closing note. It was the heart of his argument, and it was, as you say, I think it was not very convincing. We've carried a whole lot more water for Israel over the years than we have for Turkey and Pakistan in terms of enduring opprobrium of large numbers of people.
No, you would expect a realist to do roughly what they're doing on that, seeing that distinction the way they are. I had kind of a different problem with the Mearsheimer piece. It gets to what you said initially. You said they don't see America's interests as coinciding with America's. What did I say? America's and Israel's and America's.
The realists.
The realists. Mearsheimer and Walt.
Yes.
You said.
Right.
And indeed, they say early on, why has the U.S. been willing to set aside its own security and that of many of its allies in order to advance the interests of another state? My problem with that is that I think America's and Israel's interests are very closely intertwined. In particular, it is in America's interest for Israel to have long-term peaceful security, which it can only have if the Palestinian problem is solved. And My problem with America's policy is that it hasn't served either Israel's or America's interests, because we've let Israel do things that have made that kind of solution less likely. And the classic example is the settlement movement.
We're in the same boat, and we're entitled to a larger say in how the boat is steered now that we're actually having our buildings blown up by the enemies, which is why we can tell them what to do without invading their sovereignty, just as we can tell the Iraqis what we want them to do without invading their sovereignty, because we are all in the same boat and we're allowed to have a say.
We are in the same boat, but even if we weren't, even if our stake in this weren't more visible since 9/11, the fact is, I don't think we've been a good friend to Israel. I think a good friend stops you from being self-destructive.
But that's attenuated now that Sharon has moved to a more moderate position with the withdrawal.
I think Sharon has been part of the self-destruction, as you know. I think he is.
He has been, but recently
now that he's in a coma, he's definitely doing less damage.
I know, but before his stroke with the withdrawal from Gaza, that was a bad move too. That was something
absolutely. As you know, I mean, the way it was handled, he did not want to make it a negotiated thing. He made it unilateral. That strengthened Hamas. And I would say, look, and the proof is in the pudding. They did well in the election. Systematically, he has refused to try to strengthen moderate forces among the Palestinians, and that's because he just gave up on it a long time ago. And maybe that's something you can argue about. Maybe he has reason to. But the fact is, I think he decided a long time ago, look, there's never going to be coherence on that side. We're going to withdraw behind our walls, and so it's actually good for me if disorder and incoherence prevails on the Palestinian side, because then I have more and more justification in just going unilateral. And I thought that the final proof of that was the way he conducted the Gaza withdrawal without using it to strengthen Abbas, without talking to Abbas about it.
My objection is that you're sort of requiring this elaborate play-acting charade in which he paternalistically helps moderate Palestinians, and I just don't think, if you have to go through that charade, the moderate Palestinians are sort of doomed anyway, and B, it's a hard charade to pull off, isn't it? I mean, you're basically acting for him to elaborately pretend to reluctantly concede things he's perfectly willing to do unilaterally.
Good diplomacy is full of distinctions between what's going on the surface and what's really going on. I don't know why this sounds so radical. But more than that, I mean, he is. I just think his targeted assassinations and everything have been conducted so relentlessly and recklessly. And in fact, there's one number in this paper. I don't know if it's true. The Mearsheimer paper that something like for every one Israeli who's died, 3.4 Palestinians have, and most of those 3.4 have been innocent bystanders. You certainly saw a lot of that during the Sharon regime. Kids being killed and so on, and that just massively complicates the thing. But anyway, my larger point is that I think that a big mistake that Mearsheimer and Walt are making, I mean, just factually wrong, in addition to not being a smart way to frame it rhetorically, is to act as if Israel's and America's interests don't essentially coincide, rather than saying, yeah, we're their friend, we should be their friend, but we should be a good friend, and good friends don't let you do self-destructive things. I mean, I think the situation in Israel at this point is to a point of intensity where, understandably, both Israelis and Palestinians have trouble seeing the thing with detachment. And that's just, it just makes sense. I would too if I were there.
But it may be that our interests, I mean, I tend to think our interests more or less coincide, but, if you could rewind the entire history of the region and start with the creation of the Jewish state, was it in our interest to have a Jewish state in that region? These people are probably just starting from we're starting the rethinking from an earlier point in history. And the second thing is you worry about the subtle sort of, subconscious process by which all these people convince themselves that Israel and the United States' interests are the same. That's what I worry about. I worry about, the so-called Jewish lobby sort of subconsciously saying, well, the interests are congruent when in fact sometimes they're not.
Well, sometimes they're not, but what's funny is that at the end, even Mearsheimer and Walt, after saying what I quoted them as saying at the outset, here's what they say at the end. Finally, the lobby's influence, meaning the Israel lobby's influence, has been bad for Israel. its ability to persuade Washington to support an expansionist agenda has discouraged Israel from seizing opportunities that would have saved Israeli lives and shrunk the ranks of Palestinian extremists, blah, 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 blah. Leaving aside the question of how influential the lobby has been, it's certainly the fact that our support of their policies has been bad for Israel in exactly the way they describe. So there's a certain tension between the note they close on and the note they open on. They would have been much smarter to open with the note they closed on. But in general, I would say rhetorical deftness is not a really salient feature of this piece. I mean, in a few cases, I thought they stated things in needlessly strong or simplistic ways. And certainly the reaction they aroused was, from their point of view, I think maybe counterproductive. Well, how do you read what...
How do you mean counterproductive from their point of view?
Well, I think they wanted to turn this into an actual issue that gets discussed.
Right.
And if it's getting discussed anywhere else than between you and me right now, and a lot of right-wing but low-profile blogs, then I'm not really aware of it. I mean, I searched Technorati. Left-wing blogs, aside from like Juan Cole, are entirely silent about it, and the high-profile right-wing blogs are maintaining silence about it.
For sure, because it was a clumsy article. But I think every time you plant the seed that maybe the interests are not completely coincident, or that we should have a stronger say and stop the right-wing Israelis from plunging the region needlessly into war in the ways that hurt their own country, it has the effect of planting that idea in the public mind. I think it does have a little bit of effect. And every time somebody's accused of anti-Semitism foolishly, that weakens the charge in the future.
You have this touching faith in the ultimate triumph of rationalism. I mean, I think when you are stigmatized as anti-Semitic in places like the Washington Post, didn't you think that was the upshot of that little item in Outlook?
I've been stigmatized as anti-Semitic in the Washington Post.
You have personally?
And I'm here to tell that it's not fatal.
But
if
wait,
you're Jewish.
You're Jewish, so technically shouldn't the charge be self-hating Jew, not anti-Semitic?
Well, technically, if you made the charge you would make, that's the charge you would make, yes. But it's a bogus charge, and and the people who make it are sort of honest enough to back off it very quickly. And so I think that bullet has been,
Well, then why is nobody discussing this, the actual issues they raise in the mainstream media, or even in high-profile blogs?
Because it hasn't had that impact because people think, do we want to go through this again now? I mean,
right. The other thing I'd say about this is, see, the whole question of the Israel lobby is, I think, it's of dubious utility ever to go into people's motivations for espousing policies rather than just argue the merits of the policies. And it's especially dubious after a war that has gone badly to talk about the motivations and who exactly is responsible for the war, especially if you're positing some correlation, any correlation with ethnicity. I mean, I think that's not productive and not smart.
I agree that's uglier, the stab in the back, yeah. Anyway, we should move on. We should move on. We're perilously close to agreement. Immigration is next?
Yeah, and that is mainly me asking questions of you, I think. I mean,
okay, go ahead.
The recent news is, I guess, yesterday the Senate panel passed a bill that, it went past committee with unanimous Democratic support, partial Republican support, split Republicans on this, that I guess offers the prospect of amnesty and even ultimate citizenship to illegal aliens. Now, one reason this puzzles me is because I listened to your dialogue with Jim Pinkerton.
Right.
You two seemed in pretty much unanimous agreement that, look, the actual politics of this thing are for a tough anti-immigration stance, and anybody who doesn't understand that yet soon will. So I guess my question is, what is it that you guys understand that none of the Democrats on this committee understand? I mean, you'd think, because a large part of your argument was this threatens the interests of, indigenous working class Americans.
Well, and even Paul Krugerman agrees that it threatens the interests of indigenous working class Americans. He said it lowers wages by 8%.
Fine, but A, why are all these Democrats so deluded? B, why are people like David Brooks deluded? They think it will be a disaster for the Republican Party to follow what I think is your advice.
Well, I analogize this, of course, with the welfare reform debate, and there were a few things that happened in welfare reform that seemed to be very similar to this. First, this is a bargaining chip, okay? The House has passed a very conservative bill that makes it a felony to be illegally in the country. The Senate needs something that it's going to give up to get that out of the final compromise bill. They passed this very liberal amnesty provision, so they canceled each other out in the final compromise. Neither of them makes it in. That tends to be what happens.
Yeah, but as a political matter, those Democrats have to defend this particular vote. Well, they didn't vote on the House bill.
The Democrats are happy to defend it. They actually believe in it. What's different from the welfare debate is that there's a large pool of Latinos out there, a growing part of the electorate, who both parties think will vote on the basis of what happens in this bill. That wasn't true with welfare reform. The black vote isn't growing as rapidly as the Latino vote, and nobody thought that they were entirely up for grabs by what happened with welfare reform. That is sort of the case with immigration. So Democrats think A, they think they're right, and B, they think this is going to cement the Latino vote for generations. And that they may be right, but in the short term, I think it's a loser for them. And I think that will prevail when the final compromise is cobbled out. I think we're heading for, with all the controversial provisions stripped out, some sort of border security only bill that the Republicans then take back to the voters. And most of the Democrats go along with it. If you look at the people who voted for Tancredo's bill in Colorado, Morris Udall's son, Salazar, who's the brother of a Latino U.S. senator and a Democrat, both Democrats, voted for Tancredo's border restrictions. So it's not something where the Democrats are going to filibuster or stop. And I just see the liberal amnesty thing as people want to get it on the record for the future, but it'll be stripped out in the final conference committee.
Okay, now on the merits of the thing, as to what the smart thing to do is your position that if you could, you're very worried about the incentive effects of amnesty or a route to citizenship or something. You think that'll encourage more illegal immigration. In principle, if you could control the borders, okay, then your opposition to those things would...
Well, if you could control the borders, I would definitely be for a guest worker program that offered a path to citizenship for people who come and work here under the guest worker program and obey the laws. I think Kevin Drum is right, that it's wrong to have a second class of workers who can't be citizens who are here working in this country. So for the future, that'd be fine. If we could say that these are the only people coming in and that it wasn't also a bunch of illegals on top of that. As for the people who are already here, even if the borders were 100% sealed, then practically the incentive would have no effect. I still have problems rewarding people for jumping the queue. So I would say that they stay here and they work here as illegals, but they don't get this right path to citizenship that the people who come here illegally in the guest worker program, get. Okay. If they want to go home and reapply, that's fine, but otherwise, they're here.
But do you agree with me that felonizing their presence after they've come over is unfair? When they came over, we basically let them over with a wink and a nod. All of, the business community wanted them over, and they heard that you come over, and nobody really says anything, and they did it. And now, to turn it into a felony seems to me...
I think it's too much, but I don't think it doesn't outrage me. If they made it a misdemeanor, it wouldn't outrage me. It depends what the penalties for the felony are. If you execute people, yes, that's way too much. If the penalties for the felony are, a $2,000 fine... then no. Just calling it a felony. But
first of all, $2,000 for these
felony
people
has to have a year in jail. So yes, that's a little much.
Yeah, that's much. I would say anything that leads them to suddenly cower in fear is just intolerable to me. again, we basically said implicitly it's no big deal if you come over here. There's work for you to do. You'll be appreciated. They are appreciated. They're members of the community in some meaningful sense.
Don't be silly. They knew they were breaking the law. They knew they were evading La Migra. They snuck across the border. They knew they were breaking the law. I mean,
they knew they were breaking the law the way you know you're breaking the law when you feed a parking meter. But if suddenly somebody comes up and says that's 2 weeks in jail, that's not fair. And the specter of all of these people suddenly living in fear is something I just find completely unconscionable. The ones I see are decent people who came here to escape poverty back when we were basically letting them come, and the idea that 11 million people would suddenly be running around in a state of fear is something I just can't...
Well, I agree that felony is too much, but if you're going to deter future illegal immigration, which I think you agree you want to do, if you were going to get control back of the borders, that's part of it. Life has to be slightly uncomfortable for the people who broke the law. Otherwise, you're telling future people, hey, come here, and you'll be, in the future when there's not 11 million but 22 million, you too can be the subject of our compassion. And we're not going to take it out too hard on you, and we're going to give you amnesty too.
Those incentive effects only matter if you can't control the border.
But obviously we can't control the border 100%. And in fact, it's a standard point of the left, the pro-immigrant left, is that this wall and everything we're talking about won't control the flow of immigration. They can't have it both ways.
Look, if you took the money we spent on the Iraq War, you could control the border. Are you kidding?
I think you could go a long way, but it's not going to be 100%.
You could array the troops who are in Iraq along the border in a way that everyone would be able to see the person on his right and on his left. They'd be within sight of each other. I mean, you could do it.
I agree, and that lets us be much more generous. I agree with that, and we should do that. But you're arguing now against the democratic Latino immigrant rights position, which is all these attempts are futile, but somehow we should also be generous even though we can't control the borders.
Well, fine,
if you look at Chris Matthews, the guy was saying, oh, we can never build a wall. They'll build ladders over the wall. They'll catapult themselves over the wall. They'll dig under the wall. Well, but obviously the wall would reduce the flow.
Right. No, I think if you can reduce it to a trickle by controlling the border, which you want to do on national security grounds anyway, then you can, A, afford to be humane toward the people who are already here.
Right.
And I personally think you have these moral issues about jumping the line. I personally think at that point you could do an amnesty and even have a route to citizenship.
The point we agree on is that a tight border enforcement enables us to be more liberal. That is a point that is lost on the Democrats who are opposing tight border enforcement on the grounds that it's futile. And are tarring as vicious and draconian and Republican attempts to have tight border enforcement, which, as you say, are what will enable us to be more generous to these people.
Right, but I do agree that a super tight border and a wall and the sight of that and everything has enough of a kind of a downside that I only want to do it if our policy toward the illegals who are already here is going to be extremely humane, and we're going to have a reasonably generous legal immigration policy.
Well, I agree we should have a generous legal immigration policy, but my point is let's build the wall and let's do these measures and see what happens. And then, 2 years from now, we can, enact whatever programs are necessary, and that's the logic that leads us to have an enforcement-only bill this year.
Well, politically, it's going to be a lot easier to get the wall if you make the concessions I would demand in advance.
I think the wall is still going to annoy Mexicans, even if we have certain concessions.
Right, but you peel away part of that constituency if you have a very generous amnesty and citizenship policy for the ones who are already there.
If we have a very generous amnesty and citizenship policy, that's a signal to everybody in Latin America, come north. That's not a signal we want to send right now.
Well, no, but you could control the border. I mean, like literally, if you had the troops that you have in Iraq, you could put them down as you're building the fence.
Fine, I'm saying you
could
build the wall.
You could slow it to a trickle in a short period of time.
But first, I'm saying you have to build the wall first before you send the negative signal.
One final point, in listening, a couple of viewers were quite alarmed by the tone of your dialogue with Pinkerton, because both of you are pretty hard line on immigration. One thing that became clear to me, I think, in the course of listening to it, is that when he made the kind of extreme pronouncement, no multicultural nation has ever worked out, it turned out, I think, that he didn't actually mean what people naturally thought, which is no ethnically integrated society has ever worked out.
No, he just meant we have to assimilate people into an English-speaking
Exactly.
culture.
Well, that's very different, and that's not what it sounded like at first. And I would just stress that one thing about offering citizenship is it allows you to really facilitate the assimilation process. You can demand whatever you want in exchange for citizenship, not just fluency in English, but a knowledge of American history. You know, you could make it a pretty rigorous thing.
Well, that assumes that people will take it up. In fact, the dilemma is that, you know, right now Kennedy wants to charge them what, $1,000 to get their amnesty. That's probably too much. A lot of people won't take that. It's too much money. They'd rather the life of an illegal is not so bad that if they could pay $1,000, they'd get out of it. They won't pay the $1,000. So I think you're vastly overestimating the amount of demands you can make of people to become citizens.
But part of what you're saying is really that $1,000 is a whole lot of money.
No,
to these people.
and another part of what I'm saying is life of the illegals here in Aztlan is not that bad. They're not persecuted. They're living across town. They're making money. They're marrying. They're raising their families, and it's not a miserable, horrible life.
No, and I would also just say that casual observation leads me to believe that they're a great bunch of people. Sorry, but I'm just not alarmed the way you are.
I have never said they're not a great bunch of people. The atmosphere of the march that I was on was one of the best atmospheres I've ever seen.
You're afraid these Mexican flags signify that they'll take Southern California away from you and you'll have to move.
Well, even nice people have been known to go crazy and to be irredentist. You know, it's a realistic, rational political fear. I cast no aspersions on either Latino immigrants or Mexican immigrants, and in fact, you know, people in Southern California deeply value their presence. And I don't think the percent of people who are upset that there are these guys on the street corners and, you know, they're playing their loud music, and tiny percentage of the population.
Final question about this. You know, in our neighborhood, a lot of yard work is done for pay, right?
Right.
Almost nobody does their own yard. It's entirely Hispanic.
Right.
I haven't seen a black, you know, and there are blacks in the area who could do it. It's totally Hispanic. And
right.
I have at least two theories as to why that is, and I'm curious as to whether you favor one or have a third. One is that this kind of labor, because of the history of blacks in America, notably slavery, it's particularly hard psychologically to do a job that involves serving someone in their presence, as opposed to, say, building a car for them.
That's definitely true. What's your second?
The second one is that it's discrimination, that actually people around here are less trusting. They're less enthusiastic, maybe, about having young black males on their property, more worried about what they might do or something like that.
That's true too, but that's also true of employers generally. I think Latinos are favored over blacks in the low-wage labor market. That's one of the reasons why it would improve black wages of existing American citizens if we restricted the flow of immigrants.
Although the first of the two theories doesn't...
Paul Krugman himself has argued.
But the first of those two theories doesn't really suggest that. I mean, if blacks just have trouble with certain kinds of work, then it isn't just that Latinos are being favored.
Correct.
Okay.
But it's all a matter of degree. And there's other kind of non-service work where Latinos also compete with blacks that doesn't have the stigma that you mentioned.
So,
okay.
We brought clarity to the issue.
As always. Now, you want to talk again about Ann Coulter?
I was actually going to try to avoid mentioning her name, but there, you've done it.
I've done it. Sorry.
I'll avoid it, because all I wanted to do is clarify the abstract principles that I've been arguing for in the course of our, how should we say, discussion.
Okay.
Particularly because after the last discussion, you know, somebody wrote in saying, oh, Bob wants to play thought police and tell people who can be their friend and who can speak at what universities. Here are these, what seem to me, uncontroversial propositions, okay? First of all, ethnic slurs toward Muslims should be taken as seriously as ethnic slurs toward Jews and blacks.
Okay.
the way we currently handle ethnic slurs toward Jews and blacks is through a series of informal sanctions, moral sanctions. One of them is, we don't, people like you and me don't generally associate with people who use those slurs apologetically. Another is that they're not
in public.
Well, okay. That was certainly the case in the issue that I'm talking about involving the woman whom I won't name, that this was in public.
But the incident you won't talk about involving the woman you won't name wasn't as severe an ethnic slur as other ethnic slurs we could think of, and you want to have that argument all over again? No. You want to move on to point 3.
Right. No, I'm willing to have the argument, but I don't, as long as we don't have to name the woman, I'm willing to have it. I'm not eager to have it. I don't think we resolve anything.
What's your next point?
Just that another informal sanction is that people like this are not generally welcome by certain kinds of institutions to give talks. And in this case, it was Loyola University. I don't think they would invite somebody known for making blatant anti-Semitic slurs or anti-black slurs. And that's the point I was making. And I guess a larger point is that I think there's a lack of appreciation, probably both on the left and the right, of the kinds of serious informal firepower that, in fact, are brought to bear in the course of upholding moral norms. We don't think about it that often, that we consider some things so grave that people are actually ostracized if they pass the line. But the fact is, it's the way society works, and I don't think probably any society can do without it. Now, the things that we ostracize people for change as norms evolve. I mean, it used to be the case that if you got divorced, you were ostracized, and then society implicitly made the judgment that divorce isn't that serious. You can argue about that, but
I agree that informal. And my point that I would like to, as long as we're engaged in shoring up our positions here. You want this informal self-censorship in the grounds of social peace, and I say that's fine, but yet you admitted that when you're confronted with people who don't want informal self-censorship but want actual censorship, we have to tell them, no, you lose.
Right.
And my point is, well, there goes your social peace. You're only ensuring social peace for the tiny sliver of, or maybe a big sliver, whatever sliver Islamists want self-censorship but don't want actual censorship, you're buying them off. But you're not doing anything to ensure social peace with people who want censorship, so the effect of what you're advocating is somewhat limited, and eventually you may have to do something that will cause riots around the world and the burning of embassies, and you'll have to stand by it.
Okay, you're switching frames of reference to the cartoon example. First, let me argue against your point in principle.
Well, but that's what your op-ed was about, that Ann Coulter got that, so it's hardly irrelevant.
It's not unconnected. But first of all, let me say that in principle, the problem with that argument is that certainly in some cases, the moral sanctions alone are sufficient. American society is a good example where it is not illegal to use a slur, a racial slur, but you don't hear them because the informal sanctions are so strong. And so it actually can work.
It can
principle,
work, but sometimes it
and
doesn't
moreover,
work.
in exactly the context that I'm discussing and emphasizing, which is not the Muslim cartoon thing, it demonstrably works, first of all. Secondly, in the case of the Muslim cartoon thing, you're assuming that kind of the last thing they said in the course of this back and forth, which is, we want the Danish government to do such and such, is the motivating grievance or something.
Well, their first thing, you made a big point about it, they sent a delegation to meet with the Danish government. Well, what did they want them to do? If not stop these people from publishing cartoons, or they're the state. It's a fundamental confusion about free speech.
Mickey,
free speech that you would even petition the Danish government about a Danish cartoon.
But Mickey, maybe just a meeting? The Danish government refused to meet with them. The Danish prime minister refused to meet with them. Okay?
And maybe they wanted him to condemn them. Okay, that's fair enough.
So he didn't even meet. That's mistake
fair
number
enough,
one. But secondly, Mickey, what I'm saying is that if the moral code I'm talking about were reasonably effective, you would not have had a Danish newspaper editor saying, let's have a contest to see if we can offend Muslims.
There are some intermediate cases, and maybe that's one of them, where your social inhibitions would have effect.
You
but
do
there are a
what you
whole
can.
lot where it wouldn't, and don't pretend that it's the solution to the problem.
If you catch me pretending that, yeah, I definitely want you to chastise me. All I'm saying is that, you do what you can. Nothing is by itself a miracle cure, but when you have a very volatile situation, as we do in the world right now, you figure out where you can make some progress on the margins.
And in the second point about the woman who cannot be named, raghead just isn't as bad as the N-word. It's not that bad. You're wildly exaggerating how bad it is.
Mickey, it's totally a matter.
The best evidence, as our emails pointed out, is that we don't dare say the N-word. We say N-word instead of the N-word.
I know.
Yet we say raghead. It's not as bad. I got a jaywalking ticket yesterday from a policeman, a motorcycle policeman. The epithet for motorcycle policeman in the LAPD is buckethead. Anytime you make fun of somebody's clothing or their eating habits, like calling Germans krauts, it's not as bad as saying something that implies they're fundamentally inferior. And the raghead does not imply that somebody's fundamentally inferior.
First of all, you would agree, I think, that ethnicity is a special
you're
category.
wildly exaggerating just because you have some animus against Ann Coulter.
Oh, now wait, Mickey, one thing I want you to agree with me on is before she said anything about me at all, I really was on your case about her, and I said, I don't think you should be associated.
Yeah,
but wait, as a matter of fact...
Does that prove you have animus? No animus, or that you have animus?
No, I'm saying the animus precedes her attack on me.
No, right.
Okay, I do want you to stipulate that.
I'll stipulate that.
This is not tit for tat. It's that I thought she was dangerous from the beginning.
Yeah, but I just think you're exaggerating to prove your point, which is a valid point, but this may not be the best example. If she used the N-word, then, yeah, sure, she should be shunned. But she didn't do that.
But, Mickey, you have to understand, my argument is, first of all, how offensive a slur is depends on how the people who are the object of it react to it. And actually, neither you nor I hangs out with enough American Muslims to know, really, right?
That's giving them a lot of power, Bob. They might be offended.
That's the way we do it.
But
Mickey,
if they're
there's nothing
offended by
intrinsically...
racial equality, we're supposed to credit that. Say, well, we can't do that because they're the ones that decide how offensive something is.
Mickey, there was nothing intrinsically, denotatively pejorative originally. If you trace the evolution of the N-word, it's not like it had some dictionary definition that meant inferior. I do believe it was originally a variation on the pronunciation of Negro, and it had to do with the context in which maybe Southerners especially uttered it. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but the point is, you can't point to the actual meaning of a word. The magnitude of a slur is something that depends on the context and the way it's perceived. And my argument is, and I guarantee you, Mickey, that there are a lot of American Muslims who do not respond warmly to that word. And you're acting as if they would shrug it off. I think you're
there are a lot of
factually
American
wrong.
Jews that went berserk when Jesse Jackson said Hymietown. So what? So people go berserk.
So people go berserk. So the world goes off a cliff. I mean, Mickey, one thing we do in this world is try to keep certain groups of people from going berserk, okay? If everybody went berserk, our show might go off the air
I
or
think
something.
part of the problem is I don't know what the equivalent of the N-word is for Arab. There isn't a more vicious word that I can think of, so it's hard to say when people use this unvicious word what the... what it is they're refraining from saying.
Okay, but the specific evidence you're introducing, which is that we will pronounce this word, but we don't pronounce the N-word, that's my point. If America is smart about what would be in its national security and what would be conducive to social harmony, it will put that ethnic slur against Muslims in the same category as the N-word. That's what I'm arguing. So you can't use the fact that it's not in that category as evidence against my argument.
I think you're giving too much... credit to the culture of victimization.
Of what?
You're just letting people play the victims and push you around too much. I agree that most of what you're saying, I just think you're going too far. You're saying whatever they say, whatever they offends them, hey, we won't do that. And that's going too far.
No, I think ethnicity is a special category, and I think we do cut more slack to disenfranchised or less powerful groups for good reasons.
You're saying not only should we not say it, but we shouldn't associate with anybody who says it. I mean, you're just going way overboard.
Well, you agree that that's how we handle the N-word, right?
Yes, but she didn't say the N-word.
Well, okay, we're back to my... Okay, we're just back to my making the abstract point that all I'm saying... No, I'm not trying to run your social life. All I'm saying, in abstract terms, is that ethnic slurs against Muslims should be handled the same way ethnic slurs against blacks are. Now, you agreed to that in principle, I think, at the beginning of this,
Yes.
And I will leave you to figure
I
out
agree
what
with
kind of
that.
implications that has for your social life. But that's the abstract
I
point
agree
I'm
with
making.
that. But we're disagreeing over its application of that principle to this particular case. Most of the people I talk to agree that ragheads is not as bad as the N-word.
Are they
But
Muslims?
I don't know what it would be.
Are they Muslims?
No, they're not Muslims.
Might ask one or two.
Well, you might too.
I'll bet you find it a little
you're
awkward asking
the
them.
one that's trying to tell me what to do. Why don't you ask one or two?
I'll ask one. There's only one I see regularly, but I'll do that. Report back.
Oh, please don't. Okay. Next.
Well, I'm kind of tired, but let's go ahead and finish. Oh, because we have the motto contest.
Right.
Remember, somebody wrote in suggesting we do mugs and T-shirts.
Reader interaction.
Reader interaction.
Viewer interaction, sorry.
And then somebody pointed out to me that you can have these things done very easily at cafepress.com. So that is our intention.
Right.
Blogging Heads TV mugs and or T-shirts. Some entries were sent in. Now, here's one. You think I should mention only the initials of these people, is that right?
Yeah, I think that's safer.
Okay, from DB.
Right.
Log in your noggin. Log in your noggin. But log in is 2 words.
Login or blogging?
Well, interestingly, it could be either, but it's log, L-O-G.
Huh. Okay, that's a worthy contender.
It's a worthy contender. My problem with it is that it doesn't. It could be applied to any website, not just a video site with pretensions of being cerebral.
We can do better.
But it's not bad.
Okay.
One, I don't have this with me, but one was where we bloviate so you don't have to. I dismissed. I didn't even print out that one.
Okay.
Another one was no girls allowed, which I and I would like to point out, Mickey, we have we not, approached female bloggers about appearing on this show?
Yeah, we're trying.
We're working on it. They keep saying no.
Efforting, as they say in Newsweek.
Maybe we should put someone else in charge of the campaign, but don't take that as criticism.
Thank you. Yeah, okay.
They love you, man. Okay, here's another one from JL. Blogging Heads TV, it remains to be seen.
Well, that's clever, but we try to be more definitive than saying it remains to be seen.
Right, but there is a double entendre of the fact that this stuff, unlike conventional television, stays on the web, so you can see it any time.
Very good point. And
that's kind of cool.
And it's gone largely unwatched by millions of people, so it remains for them to see it.
And it remains to be seen is consistent with the fact that both you and I are extremely open-minded and neither of us ever has undue confidence in our position, right?
Yes, but we don't want that as our slogan, Bob, because it implies that we're really boring.
Okay.
So,
take it back. DZ has this one. Diavlog me, exclamation point.
Not bad.
No, I like the intimation of kind of salaciousness.
Right.
Diavlog me.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, like we could have a T-shirt maybe that says, I love it when you talk dirty when you diavlog me or something?
Something like that.
Something like that.
That's good. I thought there were some better ones.
I like diavlog me. There's only one more.
Okay.
I like diavlog me quite a bit. I think, the shorter version.
Okay.
This is the last one. From SF, it's time to deploy the moose.
Yeah, I like that one better because it was, of course...
Well, that's because you came up with the moose.
That's right.
Now, what diavlog me and the moose thing have in common is that both seem to be in a kind of a code language that outsiders won't understand, and so they will want to join the club. You want that in any slogan. It's time to deploy the moose. What does that mean to you? What does that say to you?
It means nothing, and you have to be heavily into New York Times. It's actually Pinch Sulzberger, of course.
No, I know, but if you know what the moose means, it's saying that, look, it's time we had a TV show with a kind of candor and envelope-pushing quality of Blogging Heads TV, right?
You could put it that way, but I'd say none of these quite is good enough.
I could live with a couple. I like diavlog me. It gets the word. It's our word. Also, what does it sound like? What phrase does it have the same rhythm as?
Flog me.
No. It's a well-known phrase in our culture. It entered our culture a couple years ago. Name of a documentary movie.
There is something. What is it?
Supersize Me.
Oh, yeah.
Diavlog me. Same rhythm. It worked for that movie. It could work for us.
You're grasping at straws here.
Well, I could the last two I could definitely live with, and if people have something better, they
well,
should
the virtue of Cafe Press is you can put them all up there, and then people can decide what they like themselves.
If we have that kind of flexibility, there will be choice. But if there are more entries, they should put motto in the subject heading.
Yeah, I put motto in the subject heading. Send them our way. I think we can do better. I think we've made great progress here, Bob, and we can discuss these again at a future date. But I think our readers now get the idea of what we're looking for. Our viewers, sorry, I keep saying readers. Our viewers and listeners send in, and I bet we'll get better suggestions, even than those wonderful ones you just read.
I personally think we've reached the level of adequacy at least, and maybe we'll go further. Okay. But I think we've got things we can work with here. Encourage other entries.
Cool.
3 seconds until an hour.
Yeah, let's stop. See ya.
Bye.